Could NATO be coming to Asia? From all accounts, yes. The military alliance is opening its first liaison office in Japan. The date has not been revealed, but both Japanese and NATO officials have confirmed this. What will this office do? Reports say the focus will be on cyber security and disinformation. It will be a hub for NATO's Pacific partners, namely Australia, Japan, South Korea and New Zealand. All four countries attended last year's NATO summit. And this is a very controversial move. NATO stands for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Its focus is limited to the Northern Atlantic. At least it was. But Japan is new territory. It is located in the Pacific, which is outside NATO's focus area. So what explains this new office? In one word, China. Last year, NATO designated China as a security challenge. It was a first for them. 1 year later, they're opening an office in Japan. Coincidence? Well, I don't think so. NATO has been gradually pivoting to the Pacific. First came the designation of China, then came the summit where Pacific leaders attended, and now the Japan office. If the idea was to rile up China, then good job, we say. Beijing says NATO is pushing Asia towards a conflict.
NATO's continual eastward expansion in the Asia-Pacific region and its intervention in regional affairs will inevitably destroy regional peace and stability and push for bloc confrontation, which calls for high vigilance from countries in the region.
Destroy regional peace. I would say China is managing that by itself. But how should other countries view this development? Countries like India. There is no denying that NATO has a bloody past. Wherever they go, trouble has followed, like Yugoslavia or Afghanistan. There is also no ambiguity about the NATO's purpose. There is no economic or cultural angle to it. It is pure and simple military power play. So NATO turning eastward should have our attention. It could set off an arms race, or worse. Last month, America's NATO envoy talked about the alliance's Indo-Pacific plans. Here's what she said. Membership is not something that we have really considered with anyone in the Indo-Pacific or Asia-Pacific. The door is open to the region, but there are no plans to expand this to a broader global military alliance. So no membership plans, at least for the time being. But these things change fast. US allies in the region are eager to cooperate with NATO. Japan is at the forefront. Prime Minister Kishida says East Asia could be tomorrow's Ukraine. He wants to double Japan's military budget, and that could speed up the alliance's Pacific pivot. New Delhi, too, must be ready for this development. In March, NATO held talks with Indian officials behind closed doors. Reports say China was discussed. Such exchanges will be key for New Delhi. Not to think about joining NATO, because that's beyond question, but to understand what the alliance is planning to do, basically to be in the loop. US officials have talked about increasing NATO's cooperation with India. They say the door is open for New Delhi. I hope not like it was for Ukraine. You see, military power is not the answer in Asia, at least not yet. China's economic dominance remains the biggest obstacle for Asian countries. They do not particularly like China, but they cannot give up Chinese money and trade. Tackling that should be the bigger priority. As for the military challenge, there are enough regional powers who must take the lead. India is one of them. You cannot take on China by importing a transatlantic alliance. You need to strengthen existing regional groupings like Quad, like AUKUS, like ASEAN. The question is, does the West have the patience and the maturity to do this? It's day 2 of the SCO Foreign Ministers meet in Goa. Today was the moving day. The speeches, the round table, the family photo, all of it happened today. We'll start with the arrival. India's Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar welcomed his counterparts at the summit venue. All eyes were on his interaction with Bilawal Bhutto Zardari. He's the Foreign Minister of Pakistan. Full disclosure, I'm not a body language expert, but you don't have to be one to analyze these pictures. It was a cold and curt welcome by S. Jaishankar, just a namaste and a few photos. No smiles, no banter, and certainly not a handshake. India has made it clear that terror and talks cannot go hand in hand. So nothing surprising about these pictures. After the official welcome, the meeting began. S. Jaishankar, being the host, spoke first.
We firmly believe that there can be no justification for terrorism, and it must be stopped in all its forms and manifestations, including cross-border terrorism.
He did not name any country there, but the reference is clear. Only one SCO member is actively pushing cross-border terrorism, and that is Pakistan. So Jaishankar urged all SCO members to freeze terror finances, to cut off the money. When Bhutto spoke, he took a jibe at India too. He said countries should not weaponize terrorism for diplomatic point scoring. A bit rich for Islamabad, we say. Forget weaponizing terrorism. This is a country that uses terrorism as legitimate foreign policy. But then again, what else can you expect from Pakistan? Coming back to India's statement, Minister Jaishankar's speech emphasized on 3 points. Number one, counter-terrorism. We've already discussed about that in detail. Number two, connectivity. Jaishankar said connectivity is key to progress. At the same time, he had a rider. Connectivity must not violate territorial integrity or sovereignty. I hope China was listening, because that is a clear message to them. Their so-called China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or CPEC, violates Indian sovereignty. It passes through land illegally occupied by Pakistan. And point number three that the Indian side made, SCO reforms. Jaishankar asked member states to include English as a third official language. Now, this may sound benign, but it's also a matter of influence and engagement. Right now, the SCO has two official languages, Russian and Mandarin. It reflects the early structure of the SCO. But now it is becoming a much larger Eurasian body. So including English will make matters easier. Jaishankar also touched upon inducting new members. Iran and Belarus are first in line. They're hoping to officially join by the end of this year. So that's what happened at the SCO. A frosty welcome, some veiled attacks, and this family photo. The SCO has 8 members. Must say the Goan sun is looking fantastic. But on a serious note, what do we make of this summit? For any regional group to succeed, you need unity, you need political unity. And that's something that the SCO lacks. When the defense ministers met last month, there was no joint statement. Same story today. China and Russia would like a statement taking on the West, but India wouldn't. India would like a statement on cross-border terror and sovereignty, but China and Pakistan wouldn't. Every member would like a statement on the Ukraine war, but Russia wouldn't. These divisions are holding the SCO hostage. They also raise larger questions about India's engagement with China. On Thursday, Jaishankar met his Chinese counterpart. It was a repeat of the defense ministers' meeting last month. India talked about settling the border. China talked about forgetting the border. Beijing wants India to accept the status quo and move on, but New Delhi has refused to do that. What it has not refused is official engagement, which is honestly a contradiction. If terror and talks cannot go hand in hand, how can border violations and talks go hand in hand? Or trade and border violations? It's a question that India must ask itself, because that will determine India's engagement with China-dominated groups like BRICS and SCO. If New Delhi loses interest, the SCO will become anti-Western, a Chinese club with Chinese allies. It will be like paving a highway for China, from China to Central Asia. So engagement must continue, but it must continue on India's terms, not China's. Now let's look at what NATO's big brother, the US, is doing in the other side of the world. After all, Washington has interests all over the planet, and enemies too. One of the biggest rivals is Iran, and Tehran seems to be making some bold moves lately. Last week, Iran released footage of its navy capturing an oil tanker. It was sailing out from Kuwait and apparently bound for the US. Then 2 days ago, the US says a second tanker was captured. Washington says Tehran is up to its old tricks, disrupting the region's oil trade. But it seems the US has a solution now. It wants to line the entire Arabian Peninsula with robots at sea. The US is trying to convince its Gulf allies to add dozens of robot ships around the peninsula. Our next report has the details.
Iran's apparently at it again, disrupting oil flows in the Persian Gulf. Last week, Iran's navy seized an oil tanker near the Gulf nation of Oman. It was called the Vantage Suite. Iran's state media even released this video showing the capture. The tanker was flagged to the Marshall Islands. It's a small island nation in the Pacific Ocean. Why did Iran capture their oil tanker? Reports say it's because of where the tanker was headed. It set sail from Kuwait and was bound for Houston, Texas in the US. Basically, Iran captured an American oil shipment. Then Tehran allegedly did it again this week. This time the US released this footage. It purportedly shows Iran's Revolutionary Guard surrounding an oil tanker. This one is called the Niovi. It's flagged to the Central American nation of Panama. Iran hasn't officially acknowledged this second capture yet. Now the question is, why is Iran stalling US oil deliveries? It's part of the larger US-Iran tensions which have been exacerbated due to recent diplomatic events. Iran's long-standing rivalry with Saudi Arabia is ending. China brokered a deal to normalize ties between the two nations. Then, there's the Gulf nations trying to bring Syria back into the Arab fold. Syria's ruling regime is allied with Iran. Basically, tensions between the Arab Gulf nations and Iran are going down. It leaves Iran with more time to focus on other problems, namely the US. And of course, Washington is in a bind. On the one hand, it can't overtly call for West Asian nations to shun Iran. It has to pretend, at least, that it's happy about the tensions receding. No one wants to look like a warmonger, after all. But how can the US isolate Iran if Gulf nations are trying to mend ties? Bring up oil security, of course. Washington wants to surround the Arabian Peninsula with robots at sea. The US Fifth Fleet is based in Bahrain. It actually leads international coalitions from the Gulf nation. As part of this alliance, the US has already deployed over 50 robots at sea in the region. These are also called unmanned surface vehicles, or USVs. Basically, naval drones that float on the ocean surface. The US says it's a cheap way to have eyes on Iran's navy at all times. Cheap, of course, is subjective. The robots cost between $800,000 to $3 million. But they might well be within budget for America's oil-rich Gulf allies. It's even incentivizing the robots by removing red tape. They're exempt from America's lengthy foreign military sales process. The Gulf nations can snap these up quick. Despite this, the robots don't have too many takers. So far, only Bahrain and Kuwait have publicly announced plans to buy them. But the US is hopeful. It plans to have more than 100 sea robots patrolling the Persian Gulf by the end of this summer. And Iran's fuel tanker heists will definitely be used as a sales pitch for more robots at sea.
And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. Taiwan is conducting civilian drills to prepare for a Chinese attack. This is amid rising tensions between the neighbors. In Denmark, slackliners drew in crowds in the capital city of Copenhagen. They walked a 160-meter-long high line strung 15 meters above the ground. In Italy, Naples is exploding with joy. The city has finally won its first Serie A soccer title in over 3 decades. And now, taking you back in history, why is the 5th of May significant? Let's go back to the year 1961. Today, America sent its first astronaut in space, Alan B. Shepard Jr., who was launched 185 kilometers into space. He made a 15-minute suborbital flight. That'll be all for now. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on Monday.
Applause from the 120 or so people. He's going up with, I believe, Dr. Douglas and another technician, a spacesuit technician.
Liftoff. Liftoff at 34 minutes after the hour.
Email exchanges from inside the BBC, they talk about the risk of violating Indian laws. It's easier to rake up the freedom of speech debate, but does it give anyone a free pass to knowingly violate the law? America supports India because it needs India's support in return. And India is working with the US because it suits India's interests. This is how geopolitics works. Last night, he diffused a crisis with his defense minister. But today, Netanyahu was confronted with a new problem. His cabinet seems to have rebelled against him. The UK is looking at the Indian subcontinent to fill its coffers. That India seems to be negotiating from a position of power, like a partner and not a former colony.